Hi everyone, welcome to another Family Matters. I'm very excited about this one for a variety of reasons. The person who I'm interviewing is a familiar face to us here in Family First and to many of you. And also because we're talking about his book, which I have to say was a wonderful read. So with no further ado, I don't need to introduce Bruce Logan, so to speak. Everyone knows you, Bruce, but welcome to Family Matters on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
For those who don't know Bruce, and again, he'll be very familiar to those who follow the likes of Straight Talk here at Family First, but Bruce is a writer, an author, of course, because we're talking about his book. He's been an educator, just someone who has had, I think, an amazing life, which, of course, you articulate in your book. You were one of the founders and first directors of the Maxim Institute, and as Bob likes to remind you and all of us frequently, you are, I would use the term sesquipedalian, which means that you like big words, as I do. But Bruce, you're here because we're talking about your book, Pilgrim, which in itself is wonderful. Pilgrim, Multiculturalism, Diversity and Civil Religion in New Zealand Today. And can I just say thank you for giving me a copy of a book to read. I was just saying to you before we came on camera, I found it very reminiscent, I have to say. But tell us about Pilgrim. Where did this start? Why have you written it?
Well, I suppose I wrote it because the world that I lived in is a very different world than the world that my grandchildren live in. And I wanted to understand why that came about and even explain why that came about. So that was the initial motivation for it.
And that comes through very clearly as you share stories around your grandchildren. I think it was watching a Western film and sort of the themes that it had there. High Noon.
Yes, I remember watching that. It was great fun with the kids.
Well, actually, jumping straight in, because look, there are so many themes in this book. You talk about values and virtue. You talk around multiculturalism. We talk into some of the big cultural battles we're facing today, the lack of confidence in society. But before we actually do jump right in, why Pilgrim? I know in your introduction you sort of had thought of life at one level as a sort of a tragicomedy, but then you were inspired by the word pilgrim. And I just wonder if you want to talk our viewers through that.
Appropriate word. But I hope it's not pretentious. But it seemed an appropriate word because I liked the idea of being a pilgrim. And the idea of a pilgrim is reasonably current. In fact, it's become, I think, more current than it used to be. We've got people going on pilgrimages now that we didn't used to have. So it seemed an appropriate word to use.
Oh, I think it is. I think we are all pilgrims. And the great thing about what you've written here is that you bring, you out your age, that you're in your 80s, you bring a formidable experience and background, and that's part of pilgrimage through life. But one of the key things that you've touched on already, and the book is full of it, is reflecting back how things were to where we are today. And one of them was you used stories coming out of the moon landing and Woodstock, so obviously going back into the late 60s, but a time of great confidence. Why do you think we've lost a lot of that confidence in today's society?
One of the distinctions I try to draw in the book from the beginning to the end is that when I was a kid, in spite of all that was going on, we had hope. Hope was a natural part of the way we expected things to be better, and we had a hope in the future and so on. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Now, that hope seems to be, if it's not lost, it's certainly diminished. And I think it's because we have lost a belief in the nature of truth. Truth actually is if we believe in the nature of, if we believe in truth, particularly transcendent truth, that tends to give us hope. And if we don't believe in truth or transcendent truth, that tends to diminish our hope because life becomes, well, as I said in the book, one bloody thing after another.
Yeah. Which I have to say, we won't need a thesaurus for that. But I mean, so obviously transcendent hope, and for you particularly linked to a Christian belief and understanding.
Well, two or three things you could say about. One is that I'm a Christian believer, and that has consequences. But speaking generally about the Western civilization is unique in that it is based on a belief in human dignity, that human dignity is something that's given to us by God, because the Genesis story tells us that we were created in God's image, and that dignity is given to us by God. It's not given to us by the state. We don't give it to ourselves. It's something that God gives us, and it's that truth that gives confidence and has given rise to all the good things that are characteristic of Western civilization, like a belief in treating others as we would like to be treated ourselves, because they have dignity. And they have dignity because God gives them dignity. And that is unique to, we don't find that in Islam. We don't find that in Chinese culture. We only find that in Western civilization. And we're losing it. We're losing that belief. And in fact, I think I can quote Tom Holland sort of loosely, the author of Dominion, which is a very important book if people haven't read it. He talks about that all people living in Western culture swim in a Christian soup, if you remember the phrase.
Yes.
And even although we might not know or recognize that we're surrounded by Christian thought, we are influenced by it profoundly. Even protesters who protest for pro-Palestinian are still motivated by a desire in their minds of looking after the weak against the strong, which is a Christian idea. But it's a bit distorted by the time it gets to the pro-Palestinian thing. But nevertheless, we're motivated still by Christian thinking and Christian thought, even although we might be unconscious of it. That's what I was meaning.
So your book delves into this, and to encourage people, I certainly encourage viewers to buy a copy, and we'll explain how at the end, and make sure, of course, it's all written up in the text around this podcast. But you explore some of the reasons why we've become disengaged as a society from those Christian values and roots. As you say, we are in that soup, or I'd say a milieu. But what is it that you've written about in the book that sort of begins to explain?
You can isolate a number of events that took place, or a number of writers who have shed light on what's been happening to us over the last 50 years or so. And there are two or three writers that influenced me quite greatly. And I suppose the most obvious one was C.S. Lewis in his little book called The Abolition of Man. Now,
Brilliant book.
Yeah, it is a brilliant book. I used to be an English teacher, and I came across that book a long time ago. And for those people who don't know the book, it's about writers of a new English text that C.S. Lewis takes to task, because they record a story of Wordsworth with some tourists visiting a waterfall. One of the tourists says the waterfall is sublime, and the other tourist says it is pretty. Coleridge agrees with the one who says it's sublime. And because Lewis talks about a thing called objective value, and objective value says that the waterfall possesses sublimity because it is sublime. It's not a projection of my feelings on the waterfall, as one of the tourists seems to think. And indeed, as the writers of the new textbook suggest, that it is just the projection of one's feelings on the waterfall. And so in doing that, and saying that's the case, the whole notion of objective value is destroyed, and a whole raft of philosophical and very important issues are sort of dissolved in a flash of the hand. And it's that loss of a belief in the sublime, in the beauty of things, and the things have beauty in themselves, is lost if we cease to believe in the nature of truth. And
you explore that actually in some of the chapters as well, around like the diversity, equity and inclusion, multiculturalism and identity politics, I would argue, because my takeaway, like C.S. Lewis's idea is things have objective value, but in our modern society, you write about how really value in things and in people depends on others, if they value you or or not, often based on particular characteristics.
Yeah, yes, I must say, I'm dependent on a whole lot of other writers, and I am dependent on a whole lot of other writers. There's one that sheds light on that particular issue more than anyone else, I think. In fact, I've met her. She goes by the lovely name of Gertrude Himmelfarb. Now, Gertrude Himmelfarb was a New
Well,
York.
kudos that you were able to say her name. I was able to read it, of course, but I was thinking, how on earth do you pronounce it?
As I mentioned, I've actually talked to her. She was a lovely woman and very, very perceptive. Anyway, she wrote a book. In fact, she wrote several books, but there were two books she wrote that are very significant. The first one is Roads to Modernity, which looks at the English Revolution, the French Revolution, and the American Revolution, and how they're all different but have led to the way of the world we have now. Now, that's not the issue I want to talk about. I simply want to mention the book because it's worth reading. But the book that I found most useful in this context is a book called The Demoralization of Society, From Victorian Virtue. It's got a subtitle, From Victorian Virtue to Modern Values. And in that, she blames Nietzsche for all our modern ills, in that which he deliberately destroys the notion of virtue and replaces them with values. And that values are something that don't actually describe someone. How can I illustrate this? For example, let's take a virtue like courage. Courage is a virtue. We can see it in someone. If I say Bob's courageous, then I'm describing Bob. And we can see that. But if I say Bob values courage, I'm not really describing anything at all. And values don't demand anything of us, whereas virtue does demand something of us. And that's the big shift. And we don't talk about virtues anymore. We talk about values. Everything is we even have Kiwi values, whatever they are. And so values have this esoteric sort of psychological things have replaced those real flesh and blood virtue that we used to understand once upon a time. I think we probably still do, but not quite with the same conviction.
Well, I think this is one of the great things about your book, is that you're able to distill some of these quite complex ideas, philosophical ideas, and the writings of others, for me, in a way that's actually quite accessible. I think that's what I love about Pilgrim, as in the book, because it just ties a whole lot of things together in a way that's coherent, and as I keep saying, accessible.
Nice.
Well, I thought the other part too, between value and virtues, and this is me going off on a bit of a tangent, virtues, I would argue, because I come out of the Thomistic tradition, as in Thomas Aquinas, that virtues are the result of habits. So
Yes.
as you build up good habits over time, or bad habits, you have virtues and vices. In other words, the older traditions meant you had to work at things, where, again, I think as you describe things in Pilgrim, we're a very carefree society now that doesn't actually want to work all that hard at things, including virtues.
Yeah, virtues certainly are a matter of habit. They acquire a habit and they reinforce habit. And that's because they die if they're not trained, and if they're not sort of kept in the forefront and practiced. Virtues have to be practiced to be of much value, if I can use the word. I can use the word value there as a noun rather than a noun.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, again, there's so many themes in your book. One that I did want to pull out is, again, challenging society. As you go in a pilgrimage, there's always challenge. You're meeting other people. So to use that analogy of the book, you talk about your time in education, particularly the New English movement, but you talk about two examples where effectively you got cancelled. You expressed your views, and then colleagues and others had a bit of a crack at you. You just want to give our listeners a little bit of a hint of what they'll read and understand in your book.
The first time I came across that was when the New English was becoming in vogue in New Zealand. This would be in the late 70s, early 80s. I went to a conference, and the guy that was speaking, who I can't remember now, I can't remember his name, but he spoke as a kind of advertiser for the New English. And I thought he was talking absolute rubbish. And I spoke to...
I think you used the term gobbledygook.
Holy Greek, yes.
Actually, just
And
quickly, for those who don't know, what do you mean by New English?
well, the New English was really a shift away from, first of all, a leveling off of what we used to call um, the two levels that what do we call it? We didn't call it High English. The two cultures of an educated culture and a working culture, I suppose. Uh, that and that distinction was leveled because the New English said that we didn't really need to teach Shakespeare or serious traditional literature. It was just as useful to young people to teach them modern stuff, even comics for that matter, because personal experience, that is, the student's personal experience, was more important than understanding anything to do with tradition. And they were leveled off, like the Great Leveling. And the New English reinforced that kind of thinking. And so it shifted the way, in schools, the way literature was studied, in the sense that literature became a kind of a thematic sort of, so it was looked at in terms of racism or sexism or whatever. And by the way, one of the consequences of that is today I have learned, oh, well, not today, but recently I've learned that it's possible to get to school now in English class, for goodness sake, to year 13, without ever having read a whole book. So that's one of the consequences of the New English. So it was a devaluing of tradition and a highlighting of the modern, really. And that's what I understand by the New English. It's no longer new, of course, but it was new then.
No, that's right. Well, it's inculcated now throughout our systems.
Yes, it is.
But I mean, how did you find well, again, you've written the book, I've read it. For viewers who are going, oh, tell us a little bit more about that sort of cancelling dynamics. You talk about how when you spoke, I think you were debating a minister at one point, and then you were at a conference, and the early seeds you talk about of the cancel culture that we have today.
Yes. Well, I think you might be talking about the time when Russell Marshall was
That's the one. I couldn't think of the name.
Minister of Education. And in those days, I used to write quite a bit for the Herald, and I got a bit of a profile, and I was on TV. Do you remember Lindsay Perigo?
I do. In fact, he's still around. He still does. He's on RCR from time to time.
He ran a TV program for a while, and I was on a couple of his programs, and one of them was on corporal punishment. Now, corporal punishment is a non-existent issue today, but back in the 70s, it was something of an issue, and it became the consensus, I think, was that it should be abolished. But there were some people who didn't think it should be. And on those days, I was on had a significant position in the PPTA, that's the Post-Primary Teachers Association. And I said on the television that I wasn't convinced that all teachers wanted to get rid of corporal punishment. Well, that in about 3 or 4 weeks after that, at a meeting of a lot of teachers at a teachers' college thing, and 100 teachers there, I suppose, maybe even more. The first thing that went up on the screen was that I should be censured for saying that on TV, which was simply stating what I thought to be true. But it seemed I didn't realize it at the time, but I think it was the beginning of the cancel culture, that if you said something that wasn't really in harmony with the general overarching belief of what the people were holding, then you should be silenced. And that, of course, has proved to be the case, because silencing now is a normative practice.
Well, amongst many things, it's what I appreciated about the book is that you've sort of laid out the roadmap of how we've found ourselves in society today. A lot of these cancel culture or deplatforming dynamics, the move towards transhumanism, all of these things just didn't happen yesterday. They've actually been slowly percolating away. And because of your pilgrimage, your time here, 80 or so years, that you're able to actually trace that out. But you also give us, I think, some hope in the book. because of your pilgrimage or your insights of actually how we can push back against these. And a lot of it is that hope that you spoke of earlier.
Well, my solution to it is the Christian hope that Christ is Lord, and that if we accept that Christ is Lord, that he is in control of our lives, and that he's real, then cancel culture and all that goes along with it is not a fearful thing. It's something we can cope with, but that we don't need to be overwhelmed by it by any means. And as well as that, we have a great confusion around the idea of justice these days. Justice is, from my understanding, is simply people getting what they deserve. And from a Christian perspective, what we deserve is punishment because we're sinners. The prevailing doctrine, of course, is that we're not sinners, that we're victims. And that, of course, creates an entirely different dynamic because we start to feel sorry for ourselves if we're victims, whereas if we're sinners, we're willing to say we're sorry. And that used to be. In fact, that's probably the big difference in the time of when I was a young fellow and when with my grandchildren. We knew, whether we were Christian or not, back when I was lad, that we were sinners. We knew that we were flawed creatures. We were quite well aware of that. But now we're more likely to see ourselves as a victim. And that is not helpful because it encourages a way of life that, what can I say? A way of life that is overwhelmed with a temptation to be proud rather than to be humble. And that's expressed in a number of ways. In the concept of self-esteem, for example, we used to have a concept of self-respect, and that was entirely different from self-esteem. Self-respect was a belief that some things were right and some things were good, and that we had to respect those things that were good and do those things that were good so we could respect ourselves. Self-esteem is quite a different concept. It's a psychological concept that makes no moral demands of us. We just have to feel good about what we do. And if we feel good about what we do, then it is good. And so it's disjointed. And so it becomes very, very difficult to understand when you're in that frame of mind, to understand the Christian concept that we need to be redeemed, because redemption is something that results from an understanding of our own flawed nature. But self-esteem doesn't encourage it. It encourages the opposite, really. And that is not helpful, I don't think.
And I think that's a recurrent theme, actually, in your book. I'll use the word contrast or paradoxes, that things in many ways are being flipped on their heads. As you say, we've moved from humility to pride. We've moved from a sense of, we're all flawed to we're perfect. And you talked earlier, as you do in the book, about values having replaced virtue. And the other one I thought we'd draw out, because again, for viewers to understand, this is, when I say it's a big book, it's an easy read, but you touch on so many topics and we won't be able to cover them all, Bruce. But one of those other contrasts or changes is around civil religion. We've seen, if you will, Christian religion being replaced by civil religion. I thought you could just take us through that, a bit of a hint, a teaser.
Well, every nation, every civilization has a story which people shape their thinking around and come to understand who they are. Now, for nearly 2,000 years, the story that has reinforced our culture is the Christian story. Whether we're Christian or not, it's reinforced us, and it's a bottom-up kind of belief, religion. It's something that people learn to believe and out of their own volition come to understand and either reject or accept, which is what Christianity allows. The Christian faith allows us to reject or accept it. Now, that's being replaced by what I call civil religion, because the Christian story no longer controls the way we think, but a new kind of religion is seeping into our consciousness, which is a consequence of secularism. Secularism, by the way, is a Christian heresy. You couldn't have a secular understanding of life had it not been first Christian, because secularism is a reaction against Christianity to a large extent. And the new civil religion is really the secularization of culture. We no longer believe in God as an overarching, but we now accept a whole range of things to be right. We no longer, for example, believe in the notion of the family as being God-given. The little platoons, as Burke calls them. We have changed our understanding of marriage, for example. And I think that's a big one in understanding this issue, and that is that marriage was neither the creation of the church or the state. It was a consequence of the Genesis story again, that human beings were created male and female in God's image, and a man would leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. And so marriage was God-given. The state protected it, and the church gave it its mystery, or helped give it its mystery. But when we got things happening in the culture, such as same-sex marriage, for example, this is controversial, but nevertheless, I think very clear. The state became the arbiter of marriage and consequently the nature of the family. And once it does that, it starts to determine private and public morality. And that's what I mean by a civil religion. A civil religion is a religion that determines private and public morality rather than a person's religion determining private and public morality. And so that it's a loss of freedom. So we no longer have the freedom to believe what we should believe, or freedom to believe what we want to believe, but rather we are told what we want to believe. And that's happening in a whole variety of ways today. It's happening in the schools. It's happening in much of the media. And that's what's led to what we now call the cancel culture. And one of the products, by the way, of civil religion is hate speech legislation. Civil religion must have hate speech legislation in order to protect itself. Because
the new blasphemy laws, and I would argue, Bruce, that it's a sign that our modern society, our governmental, education, legal, justice structures are of a religious quality now, a civil religion. Hence, they need their own blasphemy laws.
Yeah, they are, and so we have a civil religion. We're actually controlled by that religion to a very large extent, although we may not be too conscious of it. We are nevertheless controlled by it, and so as I said, it's a loss of personal freedom, because one of the things that the Christian faith taught us was we needed to be free, and an understanding of the truth is what made us free, and we don't any longer have that. So the nature of freedom is lost. And to some extent, in the name of freedom, the civil religion will claim to be freeing us up, but it's actually doing the opposite.
Well, it's quite Orwellian in a way. Bruce, how do people get hold of this book? As I say, it is exceptionally rich in terms of your experience and your stories, the number of topics. Well, I mean, again, you know it because you wrote it, but if people want to get hold of the book, how do they do so?
Two or three ways they can do it. They can get it on Amazon, and Amazon Australia is probably the best one. And they have the bonus of that they can actually read the first chapter on Amazon and half the second chapter to get some kind of flavour of the book. Then they can do it, or they can try and get their own library to get it, or they get it from a bookshop. Try and get a bookshop to get it for them. or they can, if they want to save themselves a bit of money, they can get it from me directly. If they email me at brucealogan@gmail.com, I will send them a book.
You might even sign it for them.
For $30.
Well, you'll have to offer to sign books as well if people are going to be ordering through you. I think that would be great.
I'll sign it. For what it's worth, I'll sign it if they do email brucealogan@gmail.com.
Well, there we have it, guys. We're having it from the author himself. And again, Bruce has written Pilgrim, Multiculturalism, Diversity and Civil Religion in New Zealand Today. And look, Bruce, I'm just grateful that you've taken not only the time to talk with me today, but also the hours, days and weeks to articulate, your pilgrimage, your journey and the themes that you are seeing in our society today. And I just want to encourage everyone who's watching this show to read the book. As you say, go to Amazon, email Bruce direct, ask your bookstore.
Well, it's my privilege and pleasure, Simon. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you again for being on the show, Bruce, and thanks for writing the book.
My pleasure.